They said her body was turned into leather while she was still alive. The words sound impossible, like something born from nightmare or fevered legend. Yet when whispered in the dark, they carry a weight that feels older than disbelief. Somewhere, deep in the folds of time, there are stories of a punishment so dreadful that even death refused to come quickly. Imagine a place where the air itself feels thick with dread, where the ground is blackened by the smoke of unending fires. The night is alive with the hiss of boiling vats and the rhythm of wooden paddles stirring them. Every sound is deliberate, each movement part of a ritual older than mercy. The scent that rises is sharp, bitter, tannin, ash, and something else that the living mind refuses to name. A figure stands bound at the heart of it all. Her skin glows pale against the firelight. Her breath trembles, shallow, uneven. Around her, robed attendants chant in low, steady tones, voices stripped of emotion, shaped by obedience. To them, this is not cruelty. It is ceremony. It is the moment when the flesh of the condemned becomes an offering to the gods of conquest and fear. No one speaks her name. Some say she was the daughter of a noble who failed his Khan. Others claim she betrayed a fortress and doomed her people. Perhaps she was only a symbol, a living message meant to outlast the battle. In the language of empires, the truth of the victim never matters, only the lesson that remains. The process was not swift. It was meant to preserve, not to destroy. The body was washed, the skin treated with smoke and resin until it hardened and darkened like hide. Her screams faded long before her heartbeat did. When it was done, they said her body gleamed like bronze beneath the torchlight. And when the morning came, her form was raised high on a pole, neither living nor dead, a relic of obedience watching silently over the camp. But who was she? Was she real, or only a story whispered by soldiers to frighten deserters? Could such a thing have truly happened, or did time itself tan the tale, hardening it into legend? Across the centuries, fragments of this story appear, half-remembered chronicles, travelers' journals, and oral traditions from the steppes. Each version adds or removes a detail, but all carry the same terrible image: a woman transformed into something eternal, her suffering preserved as warning. History has a way of hiding its darkest corners in plain sight. Beneath the dust of empires lie rituals we were never meant to understand. Punishments meant not just to kill, but to erase the line between body and memory. And yet, even in the silence of the forgotten, her story breathes. Before we begin, if you find yourself drawn to the places where history keeps its shadows, join us here at Echoes of Time. A simple like helps these lost voices reach others who still dare to listen. Empires rise not only through war, but through the fear they leave behind. To understand how a story like hers could exist, we must step into the heart of an age that measured power not by mercy, but by the magnitude of obedience it could command. In the 13th century, the Mongol Empire stretched farther than any before it, from the frozen forests of the north to the burning deserts of Persia. It was a world held together by conquest, bound by fear, and guided by a belief that every act of justice must echo across generations. The Mongols understood punishment not as vengeance, but as language. A language written in sight, sound, and terror. In their chronicles, such as the secret history of the Mongols, punishment was described as both practical and sacred. A commander's failure could invite the wrath of heaven. A traitor's body might become a vessel for warning others. The empire's justice was not arbitrary, it was ritualized. Crimes against the Khan or the gods demanded not merely death, but transformation. Flesh was not simply destroyed, it was repurposed. One Persian historian, Rashīd al-Dīn, writing decades after the empire's zenith, described punishments that blurred the line between execution and ceremony. His account spoke of bodies boiled, burned, or left on display for the spirits to claim. He wrote not in horror, but in reverence for a system that believed order could only be maintained through spectacle. To the Mongols, justice was an act of preservation, the soul purified through public suffering. And yet, the tale of the woman turned to leather stands apart. It carries the strange weight of myth, the scent of something once real, stretched and hardened by retelling. Across distant cultures, echoes of similar rituals appear like reflections in a dark mirror. The Scythians of the steppe were said to have flayed their enemies, fashioning cloaks from their skin to absorb their strength. In the temples of Mesoamerica, priests peeled and wore the hides of sacrifices, believing it bridged the living and the divine. Even centuries later, in the candlelit chambers of 18th century Europe, rumors spread of human skin bound into books and relics, proof that cruelty can survive refinement. What unites these stories is not just the act but the idea behind it, that the body can be made eternal, that punishment can become preservation, and that memory must be carved into the physical world to endure. In that sense, the legend of the tanned woman is less an isolated horror and more a chapter in humanity's long obsession with transforming the mortal into the immortal through suffering. And so the question lingers, not just whether she lived, but why people needed to believe she did. Was she a warning shaped by fear? A distortion of an older funerary custom? Or the remnant of a truth too brutal for any empire to record in full? History rarely offers certainty, only fragments that shift when held to the light. What remains are stories that refuse to die, tales that teach, terrify, and remind us that civilization has always carried darkness at its core. If you've ever heard of a legend in your own culture that sounds this extreme, share it in the comments. I'd love to see how different corners of the world remember justice and how the past still whispers through our own. They say she was the daughter of a commander, a woman born into the thunder of hooves and the iron scent of war. Her father was a trusted general of the Khan, a man who conquered cities and erased borders with the sweep of his banners. But in one campaign, when the empire's gaze turned west, his fortress fell. Some claimed betrayal, others whispered of cowardice. The Khan demanded an offering, not of silver or horses, but of blood and memory. And so the punishment did not fall upon the man who led, but upon the daughter who bore his name. The night of her judgment was said to be cold and still. In the camp at the edge of the steppe, soldiers gathered in a circle of firelight. The air trembled with the low hum of drums. Every sound seemed to hang suspended, as though the wind itself had stopped to watch. At the center, a wooden platform stood beside great vats of dark liquid, a mixture brewed for weeks by the order's shamans and keepers of ritual. It was said to contain oak bark, resin, and the ashes of sacred herbs, stirred in silence beneath the open sky. To the people of the steppes, this mixture was not poison, but transformation. They believed it hardened what was mortal, sealed the spirit against decay, and bound the body to the eternal cycle of the world. When she was brought forward, her face was veiled. She neither cried nor begged. In some versions, she had already accepted her role, knowing that resistance would bring disgrace upon her lineage. To the men who prepared her, this was not a punishment. It was an act of purification. They murmured prayers to the spirits of endurance, asking them to guide her across the threshold between life and legacy. The drums deepened. Smoke rolled upward, thick and fragrant, carrying the scent of bark and burnt fat. The keepers dipped cloths into the vats and wrung them dry, each movement part of a pattern rehearsed over generations. Around them, the chanting grew steadier, the rhythm measured and slow. This was not a spectacle for the crowd. It was a dialogue between the living and the unseen. To the witnesses, it must have seemed less like execution and more like transformation. They believed that in suffering made sacred, there was redemption. Flesh could be remade into symbol, pain into permanence. When dawn finally broke over the steppe, a figure stood where the woman had been. Her shape was rigid, her outline burnished by firelight, her silence complete. To those who watched, it was not death, it was preservation. The Khan's banners were raised beside her form. Warriors bowed their heads as they passed, muttering oaths of loyalty. For years afterward, stories claimed her likeness traveled with the army, carried on a cart of black wood to remind soldiers of the price of failure. Some said that in battle, her preserved form stood at the front line, her eyes turned toward the horizon, as if still watching over the empire she had unwillingly become part of. No record can tell us which part of this story is truth and which belongs to the imagination of those who feared their rulers more than their enemies. Yet, across centuries, the image persists. The tanned woman, transformed into an artifact of obedience, a relic of the human need to turn terror into faith. But is there any truth beneath this horrifying image? Was she a person lost to myth, or did someone, somewhere, truly endure such a ritual in the name of order? If you're still watching, you're part of the few who face history's hardest truths. Hit that subscribe so you don't miss the next forgotten story that the world tried to bury. Legends, no matter how impossible they sound, are never born from nothing. They grow from fragments of truth, the bones of memory buried beneath centuries of retelling. To uncover what might have inspired the tale of the tanned woman, we must turn away from the whispers of campfires and step instead into the realm of dust, ruin, and record. In the heart of Mongolia lies the ancient capital of Karakorum, once the beating center of the Mongol world. Long after its fires went cold, archaeologists have walked its stones in search of what empire leaves behind when glory fades. Beneath layers of ash and broken pottery, they have unearthed workshops, foundries, and furnaces, places of transformation, where hides were softened, metals smelted, and wood cured for war. Among these remains, a few discoveries stood out. Vast circular vats carved into the ground, their interiors stained dark with what appeared to be resin and plant oils. Some early Soviet excavators in the 1960s speculated they might have been used for tanning leather, a practical craft that supplied the empire's endless armies. But there were no human remains within them, no sign of ritual sacrifice. What was found instead were tools of industry, tanners' knives, ladles, fragments of hardened bark. The conclusion was clear. These were workshops, not altars. And yet the imagination does not rest where evidence ends. For those who wanted the story of the tanned woman to be true, these vats became the stage upon which memory could perform again. Scholars have long wrestled with tales like this one. Rashīd al-Dīn, whose chronicles preserved much of what we know about Mongol customs, never wrote of tanning the living. He described executions, mutilations, the punishments of treachery, but even his pen, accustomed to cruelty, drew no line that far. The secret history of the Mongols, too, though filled with vengeance and retribution, speaks of ritual burning and binding, not of preserving flesh as leather. It seems the act, as told, belonged not to fact, but to the psychology of power, a fear that rulers cultivated and subjects believed. Some historians suggest that the story could have begun with a mistranslation, a chronicler's attempt to describe a funerary rite in which animal hides were wrapped around the dead to protect them from corruption. In another version, perhaps an execution involving boiling oil or resin was exaggerated over time until it hardened into the image of tanning. What began as symbolic purification may have decayed into horror through the slow alchemy of rumor. Such transformations are not unique to the Mongols. Europe, too, has worn the same mask. During times of plague and war, whispers spread of human skins turned into relics, lampshades, bindings, armor, each story feeding the fear of an enemy made monstrous. In revolutionary France, pamphlets accused nobles of tanning the bodies of peasants. In the industrial age, the myth was reversed, with elites said to commission books bound in human hide. None were proven true, yet each found believers eager to see cruelty reflected in their rivals. Myths of human leather have always been less about truth and more about projection, the mind's way of explaining the incomprehensible violence of its own kind. And so we return to the tanned woman, her story hovering between the plausible and the impossible. No direct proof has ever surfaced, no body, no inscription, no record of the ritual. Yet her legend endures, told and retold across continents, translated into 100 tongues. Perhaps it survives because it speaks to something older than any empire, our terror of being remembered through pain. For in every age, humanity has sought ways to make memory eternal. And what is more eternal than suffering made into symbol? What do you think? Could such a punishment have ever been real? Comment your thoughts below. I read them all. Every legend endures because it answers a question its age could not bear to ask aloud. The tale of the tanned woman is not only about cruelty, it is about control. Beneath its horror lies the unspoken truth that every empire, no matter how vast, fears one thing above all: forgetting. In a world where power was fleeting and loyalty fragile, rulers sought permanence not in kindness but in spectacle. A monument built from suffering lasts longer than one built from stone. Her story, real or imagined, reveals how punishment was used as performance. By transforming the body of a single condemned soul into a symbol, authority reached into the hearts of thousands. It reminded soldiers, servants, and nobles alike that obedience was not a virtue but a necessity. Fear became faith. Pain became politics. The victim became a language through which rulers spoke to eternity. But history's darkness is never only about the tyrant. It also mirrors the people who believed. The witnesses who bowed their heads, the scribes who recorded the tale, the storytellers who carried it across generations. They too shaped its meaning. They turned horror into heritage, ensuring that what began as terror would live on as caution. Through them, the line between reverence and revulsion blurred, until no one could tell where ritual ended and cruelty began. In this, the legend finds its kin across the ages. The Romans displayed the crucified as warnings beside their roads. The Aztecs dressed in the flayed skins of sacrificial victims to embody their gods. In medieval Europe, executioners hung bodies in cages to rot before the city gates, not for punishment but for permanence. Humanity has always preserved pain, embalmed it, mythologized it, made it a mirror for its own need to remember. Yet behind these spectacles, there was always a kind of fear, the fear of vanishing, of being erased by time. For those who ruled, cruelty promised immortality. For those who suffered, memory was the only rebellion left. Perhaps that is why the tanned woman endures in story, not because of what was done to her, but because she refused to disappear. She became a vessel for remembrance, a ghost made tangible, a symbol of what power demands and what it fears. And though centuries have passed, the echo remains. In museums, we still gaze at mummified bodies and preserved relics, calling them artifacts. In our headlines, we still see pain turned into spectacle. The methods have changed, but the need to look upon suffering, to make it stand for something greater, has not. The legend warns us that the urge to preserve power through pain is older than history, and perhaps not yet gone. If this story made you think differently about history's darker rituals, let us know where you're watching from. The world has its own echoes, so we return to the question that began it all. Was she real? The woman said to have been turned into leather while still alive. Or was she a reflection of something far deeper, something humanity has carried since its earliest days? The truth, as with so many of history's darkest tales, lies somewhere between the world of fact and the realm of need. Every age has its stories of punishment made divine, of cruelty sanctified by purpose. Whether she lived or not, the tanned woman became a symbol of how far human hands will go to make meaning from suffering. Her legend stands at the edge where reality ends and memory begins, a place where history stops recording and starts whispering. Perhaps she was never a person but an idea, a manifestation of fear shaped into form, a warning that power must always be seen to be absolute. Or perhaps, buried beneath the steps, there truly rests some trace of her, not flesh, not bone, but the quiet imprint of a life consumed to make others obey. What matters most is not whether the story happened, but why it refuses to fade. It lingers because it reminds us of what civilization tries hardest to forget, that beneath progress, beneath ceremony and faith, there has always been a hunger to control through terror and to remember through pain. History rarely shouts, It whispers through the things we fear the most, through the relics, the ruins, and the stories that refuse to die. The legend of the tanned woman is one of those whispers, faint but unyielding, carried across centuries like smoke that never quite clears. If her story has made you see the past in a different light, if it has made you question what we choose to preserve and what we choose to forget, leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Every voice, every echo, helps these forgotten stories find their way back into the light. You've been watching Echoes of Time, where forgotten voices still speak. Until next time, keep listening to the echoes.